What up? I'm Ben Freeman from Freeman-pedia.com, and it's been 36 years since we last met here on the Dozen Dates to Know for AP World History Modern. Last time, we were talking about some major social movements like women's suffrage, communism, and Kanye. But today we are laser focused. All these other dates over here are all over the place. Some cover multiple events in one year. Others are hyper-focused on one specific country. Not today. I would argue you can summarize all of Unit 6 in AP World on one date, 1884. Today, Otto Von Bismarck calls the powers of Europe together to settle the issue of how they would colonize Africa. And when this mustache calls you to Berlin, you go. Our 8th date to know for AP World History Modern is the 1884 Berlin Conference. The scene in a movie where there's an evil council of bad guys who get together to come up with a plan to rule the world? They always have some sort of lair where they gather to plot their evil plans. It's always some wretched hive of scum and villainy plotting their evil deeds in and around some evil table with some evil mastermind at the helm pulling the strings. Yep. The Berlin Conference was one of those. But how do we get to a point where all these different nations are sitting around a table with a plan for total global domination? I like to think of Himmler as the leader of some cabal of international villains. Like, he puts out helpful videos and stuff just as a front. Like, YouTube Himmler is Senator Palpatine, but deep down he's just Darth Sidious. He's probably like, let's get those brain cows a-milking for total YouTube domination. Sorry, the short version of the context of the Berlin Conference is just to say the Industrial Revolution happened. But they don't pay me to be brief. They don't pay me at all. Why am I doing this? Due to a myriad of inventions and geographic advantages that spurred innovation, Great Britain, and later the United States and Europe, streamlined production and what was known as the Industrial Revolution. Things were no longer made by hand in your cottage. Rather, they were mass-produced in large factories that made products cheaper, stronger, and easier to produce. The Industrial Revolution is as big a deal as the Agricultural Revolution. It's a massive turning point in human history where nothing was the same afterwards. If aliens landed and were like, what's the quick history of this planet? I'd be like, humans evolved, we farmed, the Columbian Exchange happened, we industrialized, Clemson won 3 national championships, the end. And this affected everything from textiles to medicines to agriculture. I'm not going to bog you down here. You spent a whole unit on the Industrial Revolution. The College Board devotes 7 subsections to the Industrial Revolution. And all of Unit 6 is devoted to the consequences of the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution is super important and changed the way pretty much everything was done. Remember a minute ago when I said the Industrial Revolution started in Great Britain and spread to the US and Europe? Well, since it started in those places, they now have a distinct economic advantage. And remember when I said this affected almost every aspect of life? Well, that includes the military, where innovations like the Maxim gun and massive improvements in artillery and seafaring that will put those who have these weapons at a massive advantage. So Europe and the USA will have a massive military advantage over their neighbors. And they have booming industrialized economies that require a large amount of raw materials to feed their industrialized factories. So Europe and the US have need for raw materials and new markets to sell their stuff. They also have the means to achieve this via their industrialized military machines. So what if they just, I don't know, like took over the world? Easy. We can't just have some sort of war of the world where everyone is fighting everyone else over territory. Well, not for another 30 years anyways. It's against this backdrop that the Portuguese, yeah, that's right, the Portuguese. You thought you were done with the Portuguese, didn't you? You were like, oh, Prince Henry, da Gama, Brazil, Indian Ocean, done. Nope, they're back. And this time, they're a little concerned about the new industrialized powers in Europe. They're so concerned, in fact, that they call this guy, Otto Von Bismarck, and ask him to call a meeting of the great powers of Europe so that they could settle any disputes that may be arising due to Europe's colonizing of Africa. So, on November 15th, 13 European powers and the United States met at the Berlin Conference, which was held in Berlin. 1884 is the culmination of the past 140 years of industrialization and the power that came with it. It marks a tangible moment when the powers of Europe and the United States literally sit around a table to discuss how to colonize Africa. And it's not relatively harmless like the Brotherhood of Evil Bald History People. This one has catastrophic consequences that will last into the 21st and 22nd centuries. And 23rd? So much of history is big trends or a series of moments that eventually lead up to some overarching theme. What date could encapsulate the Industrial Revolution or the Cold War? It's tough, right? But for imperialism, you literally have a very public display of the newfound powers of the West, Europe, and the United States with a specific agenda and measurable outcomes all built upon feeding into the new imperialism, which is essentially what Unit 6 is all about. There's no global conflicts meeting for Unit 7 or land-based empires meeting for Unit 3, but there is an imperialism meeting for Unit 6, and that's how 1884 made it into the dozen dates. 1884 was kind of a busy historical year, but we are focused on imperialism, and there were some pretty imperialistic things going on leading up to the conference in November of 1884. In April, the upstart German Empire, which was barely 10 years old at this point, established their protectorate over Southwest Africa and modern-day Namibia. In July, Germany continued building on their empire by staking claim to Togoland in modern-day Togo. 2 weeks later, Germany took modern-day Cameroon, also in West Africa. In August, France did the most French thing they could have done and lost a war to the Manchu Chinese in the Qing Empire. And that's just 1884. This has been going on for a while, and if you're Portugal or Britain, you gotta be worried about this German empire on the rise. It's against this historical backdrop that the Berlin Conference began in November. And it started with a curveball. Their first act was to promise to end all slavery in Africa. So it's not all terrible. Day one, they're ending slavery, but are they? They signed that they have the intention to end slavery, plus they didn't end forced labor by the colonizers against the indigenous populations of Africa. This type of forced labor will kill tens of millions and even allowed for the genocide in the Congo during King Leopold's rule over the Congo Free State. And this didn't even stop when they finally forced Leopold to sell his red rubber colony to Belgium. The forced labor system saw thousands of Congolese forced into service in World War I. Oh, and after Leopold II was paid billions in today's money to give up the Congo, he burned the entire archive of the Congo Free State, stating, "They have no right to know what I did there." Leopold is the worst. He's going to get overshadowed in the course by your Hitlers, your Stalins, your Maos, but don't forget what Leopold did in the Congo during his reign of terror. One more thing about this image. You see a bunch of Europeans and a few Americans around this table? What don't you see? Africans. In fact, the Sultan of Zanzibar asked to be included. Do you see him here? Nope. You won't see him or any Africans for that matter. The reverberations of the decisions and boundaries decided at this table continue to this day. I don't want to give too much away here, so I'll let the map tell it. This is Africa before the Berlin Conference. It's not like the Europeans are absent from Africa. You can see the Portuguese, French, and British with small coastal colonies, but 80% of the continent was still under local control. Okay, now the next map will be 30 years after the Berlin Conference. Nearly completely colonized. And they are here to stay. Unit 8 is coming up in a few months for you, and it focuses on the world after World War II. Oh yeah, there's 2 world wars coming up. But after them, Unit 8 looks at the Cold War that emerges between the United States and the Soviet Union, and also decolonization. Decolonization is basically the reverse of the process we just went through, a huge portion of which was decided on the table at the Berlin Conference in 1884. What? You didn't get that? We were hyper-focused on one place and one event. All right, the Berlin Conference is way too important for you to miss, so I got you. Watch this. Apparently, a group of bald history people meet in an island lair for some reason. Whatever their purpose, Himmler is certainly to blame for their nefarious actions. Industrialization had essentially provided the cheat codes for Europe and the United States to rapidly advance beyond the rest of the world economically and militarily. With all of these countries on the hunt for raw materials and the markets to sell their products, many turned their colonial eyes to Africa. In 1884, the Berlin Conference saw these powers meet to divide up Africa. If imperialism could be personified in one meeting, it was this one. So Africa's colonized, but you'll see it's not just Africa. Huge chunks of Asia are also on the chopping block. Do you think all these industrialized powers are just going to stay friends because Otto Von Bismarck held a conference? I'll let Otto himself tell you what he thinks about the situation. Europe today is a powder keg, and the leaders are like men smoking in an arsenal. A single spark will set off an explosion that will consume us all. I cannot tell you when that explosion will occur, but I can tell you where. Some damned foolish thing in the Balkans will set it off. He said this right before he died in 1898, just 14 years after the Berlin Conference. What does this guy know about anything, am I right? Come on. To find out, you'll have to wait another 33 years, all the way to the year 1917.